This episode was brought to you by the wonderful computer boys and girls over at the Vintage Henshin Patreon. To get in on the action, visit patreon.com/vintagehenshin today.
Galaxy Express Green Line will take you on a journey and never end.
For some, the 1970s was the golden age for Japanese pop culture, and for good reason too. In the world of tokusatsu, the henshin boom was in full effect, as was the second kaiju boom. And meanwhile, some of the greatest classics of anime were breaking out onto television, with the great super robots from Toei and Sunrise standing shoulders above the rest. So what if I told you that someone did the best thing ever and encapsulated that entire era of anime and tokusatsu into an American toy line? For 4 years, Mattel unleashed a wave of Japanese toys into American children under the banner of the Shogun Warriors. While the toy line was short-lived, it pulled off some crazy things, and after briefly mentioning it in the Lawless VHS Zone, I figured it was high time we looked at its history. For Vintage Henshin Extra, I'm Mike Dent, and this is the rise and fall of the Shogun Warriors. We start the story in Japan during the 1970s. And if you were a kid, there was one word that dominated all the hottest toys: Chogokin. Around this time, Bandai's spin-off company, Poppy, focused mostly on toys based on TV shows, movies, and anime. And they managed a string of successes thanks to their obtaining the licenses for both Kamen Rider and the up-and-coming anime series Mazinger Z. The latter helped put them on the map with their trademark Chogokins, a line of 5-inch die-cast metal action figures with rocket punches and other flying projectiles. The Chogokin, or Super Alloy moniker, hailed from Mazinger Z itself, which, in series, was made from Super Alloy Z. So basically, with the branding, Poppy implied to kids that the toys were made from the same indestructible material. Well, if only.
ポピーの超合金シリーズ、超合金はポピーだけ。
In 1973, Poppy would release the first Jumbo Machinder, a 24-inch tall polyethylene figure with a myriad of weapons, and also more rocket punches. Combined with the Chogokins, and later the Popinica, a die-cast metal vehicle line, this triple threat ensured Poppy's success in the market. And while there were imitators, there was also stiff competition. But we'll talk about them a little bit later. All of these toys were finding their way to America, becoming part of a quiet yet steady wave of Japanese imports throughout the decade. Let me explain. By the mid-1970s, kids in Hawaii were already getting access to shows like Hikaider, Ultra 7, and Inazuman via Honolulu's Kiku TV. If you lived on the West Coast, there was a chance of catching episodes of Go Ranger via Japanese broadcasting in San Francisco, Sacramento, and Los Angeles. And even with those aside, there were already episodes of Ultraman, Spectreman, and the Space Giants in syndication, with the likes of Star Blazers and Battle of the Planets soon to follow. All the while, toys for these shows and more were finding their way across the US, mostly through various Japanese retailers, and the end result was them becoming something of a fad. One of the more notable retailers was the Osaka-based Marukai Trading Company, which had a branch in Hawaii at the time, where Japanese toys were also making a killing sales-wise. While they already had outlets for other imports, they were itching to get in on the toy action. So by the mid-1970s, after establishing offices in Los Angeles and San Francisco, they began pitching the toys, mostly die-cast like Poppy's Chogokins and the obscure Arklon series, to various stores, and any interested parties ordered them through their salesmen. Marukai also pulled off a bit of a feat in conjunction with Kiku TV in 1976, sponsoring an English-subbed broadcast of Raideen the Brave. These episodes found their way to UHF stations in New York, Chicago, California, and back in Hawaii. Marukai even put out various Raideen toys and goods along with their other diecast offerings. But while this was all going on, an American toy company had begun to take notice of these crazy Japanese toys. And sure enough, in the same year, they made their move.
Imagine you enter the world of the Shogun Warriors. They're on the move.
It was Mattel, the company best known by then for Hot Wheels and Barbie, who decided to take select Shogoken, Jumbo Machiners, and Popinica toys and release them in America under the catchy title of The Shogun Warriors, Invincible Guardians of World Freedom. God, I love that title. The Shogun Warriors were basically a Hail Mary of sorts to catch up with the likes of Hasbro's G.I. Joe line and Kenner's then massively popular $6 Million Man toys. There was no TV show or comic book to initially get the word out, but regardless, they became an instant hit with kids. While it was their designs, gimmicks, and, of course, size that were the sales point, there were a few select American children who knew the shows that the robots, now dubbed Shoguns, came from. I'm sure those who were in the know were slightly puzzled by their new names. See, while the bulk of the Shogoken and Jumbo Machiners in the Shogun Warriors line retained their Japanese logos, they were given new names for the American packaging and branding. And unfortunately, the localization team took some liberties. Getter, Dragon, and Liger were now Dragoon and Raider. Raideen the Brave was now Raideen. Combattler V, released later in the line, would be simply Combatra. Guy King's Daiku Mario was now the Cargosaur, and Great Mazinger would become Great Mazinga. Please refrain from any and all Big Bang Theory jokes. There is one unique exception among the naming changes, however, and that extends to a Shogun whose Jumbo Machinery was never released in America, UFO Robo Grendizer. By the time the Shogun Warriors came out in Europe, Grendizer was being broadcast in France and Italy as Goldorak and Atlas UFO Robot, respectively. So Mattel simply changed Grendizer's name to Goldorak to tie into the broadcast. Neither the Jumbo Machineer of Goldorak nor his 5-inch Shogoken figure ever made it stateside, but Grendizer would still appear in several other forms, including the Shogun Action Vehicles line, where the Spazer, now the Solar Saucer, would join the ranks of the Varitank and Varidrine from Go Ranger. In time, the Action Vehicles line would expand to include Popinica toys from several other robot anime and tokusatsu shows. The Shogun Warriors line continued into 1977, but now they were faced with competition in the form of an old rival from Japan. In the early 1970s, Takara, who had the license to Hasbro's 12-inch G.I. Joe figures, had the brilliant idea of making the bodies clear, stuffing shiny machine parts into them, and re-releasing them as Henshin Cyborg. Along with all sorts of gadgets, the figures could wear custom costume packs with characters from popular TV shows. But eventually, Takara had a brilliant idea to keep the cost down. Make them smaller. And starting in 1974, Takara put out the first toys of the Microman series. 3.75-inch tall heroes that, in time, would gain popularity for their interchangeability across figures and accessories. The Magnamo line would eventually spin out of this, featuring characters like Go Nagai's Gotetsu G, and my personal favorite, Magna Robo Gakin, who utilized magnet ball joints and add-ons. As the line exploded in Japan, one of the then big names of American toys, Mego, would take notice. And as a result,
this is the world of the Micronauts, a Kroyer, the enemy, and the Micronaut Space Warriors, all sold separately.
In 1977, kids in America would be first introduced to the world of the Micronauts, the fancy new name for Takara's Microman line. Some sources say that the line started in 1976, but that was more or less a development and copyright year, with the proper launch following after. Commercials played up their creativity potential and encouraged children, and by that I mean mostly boys,
when Micronauts start a child's imagination working, he can create just about anything,
to play and come up with all sorts of new and original vehicles. While they lacked a TV show, the story of the Micronauts managed to get into the hands of kids thanks to a licensed comic series from Marvel. And though they did pose a threat to the Shogun Warriors, both of these lines faced an even greater problem from a galaxy far, far away. Star Wars was released theatrically in May of 1977, becoming a massive hit and pop culture phenomenon the world over. And unfortunately, both Mego and Mattel had passed on the toy license, the deal instead going to Kenner. And thanks to the film's popularity, it was pretty evident that Kenner was going to break the bank with the toy line. There was a problem. Because of the toy deal not being signed until a month before Star Wars' actual premiere, Kenner had no time to get toys out for Christmas, resorting to the now infamous early bird certificate package to compensate.
With this colorful Star Wars picture display stand and certificate to send in to get a set of figures by mail. They'll be sent to you at home between February 1st and June 1st.
There was blood in the water now, and it feels like an understatement when I say that other toy companies pounced. Specifically, Mego suddenly decided to include new hero and villain toys for the Micronauts. Firstly, the main villain of the Acroyers, Baron Karza, who totally wasn't a knockoff Darth Vader slapped onto a repainted Kotetsu Jig body, and the heroic leader of the Micronauts, the Force Commander. Totally original character, do not steal. Shameless as it was, this paid off in the long run. Christmas 1977 was ultimately dominated by both the Micronauts and the Shogun Warriors.
They also come in big sizes, like this mixture of Oriental history and futuristic fantasy called Shogun Dragon. Now he's supposed to shoot plastic battle axes and killer stars from his mechanical attachments. Sometimes he wins, and sometimes, well, he's not a very straight shooter.
But in time, Star Wars would have the last laugh. The 1978 Shogun Warriors line saw the formal introduction of Gai King as a Jumbo Machinder, as well as the release of the first set of 5-inch Chogokin figures, the model kits by the recently acquired Monogram Models Company, which were really just re-released Bandai model kits, and the U-Combined set for Combattler V. But that year's biggest addition to the line came by way of the second great masterstroke for the Shogun Warriors by Mattel. For all the anime and tokusatsu that was appearing on Japanese Access and syndication, kids across America were also getting exposure to classic monster movies now via Saturday morning programming blocks, often dubbed as creature features. The most notable variations of this programming include San Francisco's Saturday Night Creature Feature Show, hosted by the late Bob Wilkins and later John Stanley, and Chicago's own Svengoolie and the Son of Svengoolie. But amidst the likes of Dracula and Reptilicus, these creature features programming blocks also showed... Yep, that's right. Several of the classic Godzilla movies were creature feature regulars. By 1978, CinemaShares had released 3 of the homestretch films of the Showa Godzilla series, both theatrically and on television. Never mind that by then, Marvel Comics had locked down the license to an ongoing Godzilla comic, and Hanna-Barbera would even follow suit with their infamous cartoon series. Suffice to say, Godzilla was firmly in the minds of American children, so Mattel decided to do the next best thing: lock down the American Godzilla toy license. In 1978, Mattel released a Godzilla board game, the Godzilla's Gang toy line, made up of several Poppy King Saurus figures, and the creme de la creme of the entire Shogun Warriors toy line, Jumbo Machinder Godzilla. In addition to a massive figure of Rodan, that was 2 of the all-time great Toho Kaiju that were now available as 24-inch toys to fight against the growing roster of Shogun Warrior robots. And never mind the fact that they gave Godzilla a goddamn rocket punch claw. The only thing that could have made him better is if they made Godzilla compatible with the Jumbo Machinder Super Secret Weapons add-ons. I mean, think about it. You could have given Godzilla a mounted rocket launcher arm, a wrecking ball, a giant net arm, a mountain hand that shot more rockets, a water cannon. The possibilities could have been endless. Let's move on there, shall we? 1979 would be the biggest year for the Shogun Warriors. Highlights include the 5-inch 2-in-1 line, featuring several transforming figures like Raiden and Daimos, Spider-Man's Leopardon and Dai Tetsujin 1-7 joining the 3-inch figure line, and another stealth tie-in joining the action vehicles line. Because remember Message from Space from when I talked about it in the Lawless VHS Zone and how it didn't do that great in America? Well, that didn't stop Mattel from randomly including the Papinica version of the main ship, the Liabe, as part of the 79 lineup. But that would just be the tip of the iceberg. Following in the footsteps of the Micronauts and, Space Knight, Mattel struck one more deal with Marvel Comics, launching at long last a Shogun Warriors ongoing comic book series, featuring the Godzilla Comics creative team of Doug Moench and Herb Trimpe, The series revolved around 3 civilians, stuntman Richard Carson, test pilot Genji Odashu, and oceanographer Longo Savage, as they find themselves enlisted by the Followers of Light, a mysterious organization devoted to protecting mankind from colossal forces of evil. They each gain access to one of 3 Shogun Warrior robots, Raiden, Combattler V, and Danguard Ace, who by that point was the most recent addition to the toy line. Fun bit of trivia as revealed by the letters page. The original lineup to the comic was Raiden, Great Mazinger, and Getter Dragon. And this almost made it to print before someone realized they didn't have the license for them, and they scrambled to fix it. The comic itself is absolutely fun and fantastic, being a mashup of compelling storylines and great action set pieces, with dashes of elements from the various anime series sprinkled throughout. I mean, hell, Dr. Nambara from Combattler V was the team's mentor, only he was renamed here as Dr. Tambara. With the comic in tow, overall, things were looking really good for the Shogun Warriors. At least until they didn't. By 1979, both American children and toy companies had shifted away from Japan and moved towards sci-fi based toy lines instead. Because after that rough start, Star Wars had finally caught up and dominated the market. This would be cemented with the premiere of Empire Strikes Back in 1980. Even Marukai Trading, who'd have been at the forefront, had diminished their operations by the late 70s and focused back onto their other import ventures. The American-Japanese toy craze had seemingly run its course. At the same time, Mattel had attempted to conquer the glaring problem of the Shogun Warriors not having any sort of TV presence. Their closest solution was the Jim Terry production series Force 5. The anthology-like show featured a different episode from one of 5 English-dubbed anime series per day of the week, with 4 of them being major Shogun Warriors mainstays. Unfortunately, Force 5 came too little too late to make any real difference, eventually being broadcast after the line had been discontinued, which was made even worse with it being listed erroneously by some TV stations as simply Shogun Warriors instead of Force 5. And the hard-fought Shogun Warriors comic quickly found itself in hot water even. Flagging sales, likely due to dissipating interest in the Japanese toy craze, and the desire to make room for Doug Moench's then upcoming Moon Knight comic, impacted the series. Even after a massive status quo change and guest appearances by the Fantastic Four, the Shogun Warriors comic was cancelled in September of 1980, the storyline wrapping up in issue 20. This would be followed by a less than satisfactory epilogue in the pages of Fantastic Four issue 226. And so with that, despite a boisterous start, the Shogun Warriors would eventually be discontinued and vanish completely by 1980. But somewhere in the shadows, Bandai had their eyes on the American market and decided to cut out the middleman entirely, to succeed where Mattel had failed.
Toys R Us. Come to the store and it's #1. Toys R Us.
In 1979, they'd worked out a deal to have several of their toys repackaged and sold at Toys R Us under the banner of Bandai USA. Other toy companies like Clover rode their coattails and followed suit with similar distribution deals. Eventually, though, to make their next big move in America, Bandai simply took a page from Mattel. Starting in 1982, Bandai put out a new toy line for American consumers and select European markets, Godaikin. Taking a hint from the Shogun Warriors, the line took various Papinica and Shogoken toys, changed a few names, and released them out into the wild. While there were a few select anime mecha and holdouts from the Shogun Warriors, the line largely consisted of mecha from various Super Sentai and eventually Metal Hero shows, none of which were being broadcast in America at the time. One of the biggest highlights of the first wave, however, was a pre-Voltron craze Go Lion toy. Ironically, alongside the robot that almost became Voltron Defender of the Universe, Daltanius. Funny enough, when the time came to make the toys for Voltron, it was Matchbox who got the license from World Event Productions. And in turn, they negotiated a deal to get the original Go Lion and Director 15 molds from Bandai. So much for cutting out the middleman. By the time Voltron had started airing in 1984, the Godaikin line was sadly on its way out. In spite of boasting an impressive array of robots and vehicles, including several that I would kill to actually own, the toys suffered from their high price point, even by 1980s standards, and once again, the lack of a TV show. the closest thing being this Sentai footage-laden rare promo video. Both of these factors shot them in the foot when pitted against their more affordable competition, Tonka's GoBots, and, well, you can probably guess. After 3 waves of releases, Bandai quietly discontinued Godaikin in 1985. To this day, they remain hot items in the collector's market, with mint-condition Godaikin toys going for ridiculously high asking prices. In the years after, the Shogun Warriors remained fondly ingrained in the minds of the kids who grew up with them. Many of whom became some of the top creators of today. And among them, a desire grew to see a grand return for the Shoguns. Until it happened. In the year 2000, Ain't It Cool News broke details about James Cameron obtaining the film rights for a live-action adaptation of Mazinger Z. In 2010, Ain't It Cool followed it up by dropping details and a teaser trailer for a Gaiking movie that intended to create a Shogun Warriors film franchise. 2 years later, in 2012, Valhalla Entertainment, which produced The Walking Dead, had announced they'd joined forces with Toei to go ahead with the Gaiking film rights. This all culminated in 2013 when American toy company Toynami announced that they had purchased the Shogun Warriors trademark, debuting prototypes of brand new original jumbo machiners at that year's San Diego Comic-Con. Things were definitely looking up for fans, until they didn't. As of 2020, there's been no public movement made by James Cameron on Mazinger Z, his attention now 100% focused on the Avatar series. There's also been no comment from Valhalla Entertainment on anything Gaiking related, with the project seemingly stuck once again in development hell. As for Toynami, after all the hype of Comic-Con, the Shogun Warriors revival fizzled out. I reached out to them for an explanation as to what happened, but as of editing this video, I've yet to get a response. Toynami's Shogun Warriors trademark is now largely used for licensed pop culture related jumbo machiners, which Super 7 also got in on with their own brand, the Super Shoguns. Either way, to say all these developments were a disappointment would be putting it mildly. But amidst all these efforts to revive the franchise, I think everybody's missed the most important question. Do we even still need the Shogun Warriors? Because here's the thing. For all the nostalgia, the novelty of the line has long since worn off. Remember that when the Shoguns came out, it was during a period where Japanese toys were wild and exotic. But now they're not as hard to come by. You can go to your local GameStop or Barnes & Noble now and get Gundam model kits and modern Kamen Rider toys. Bandai themselves even revived the Chogokin line with the higher quality Soul Chogokin series, and there's more than a handful of places to purchase those toys online. Any other revival attempt since has merely been a tongue-in-cheek homage for homage's sake, and I don't think that's what a return of the Shogun Warriors should be. Had Toynami pushed ahead with their new original line, that's what I think the ideal path should be. Something new that sparks the imagination the way that the originals did, while also offering something new and exciting and fresh. I mean, hell, that's basically what Takara Tomy is doing right now with their ongoing revival of the Diaclone series. And that's been doing wonders for them. Otherwise, I think we should just let the brand be. Let the Shoguns just remain then as a fond memory of a time of monsters and robots, rocket punches, and invincible guardians of world freedom.